Hello everyone. So today I'm going to talk to you about palettes because there are many different types, many different shapes and sizes. It can actually be quite daunting as to pick which one that you like. So I've gathered a few that I have around my house and I'll go over them a little bit, kind of give you some pros and cons, and then I'll show you which one that I use and how I set it up and why. So hopefully this can help you pick which type of palette that you like. So a lot of these palettes, they get narrowed down by the type of paint that you use. After that, it's just a matter of preference. So this first one is actually advertised as a kid's palette, and it works great as a kid's palette. I bought these for my nieces when they were younger. These sections here, I call them sections. They're technically called wells, but they're pretty deep. And this helps kids with what I call paint portion control. A lot of the kids' paints are pretty liquidy, and a lot of the kids love to pour way more paint than they need. And so this kind of helps them decrease the amount of paint that they're pouring. It helps keep their paint separate, but still gives them a section in the middle for mixing. So this is a good one. Because it's plastic, it's really, you can use almost any type of paint with this if you really wanted to, but because of the depth, I would say these excuse me, these are best for kids paints that are liquidy or watercolors. Speaking of watercolors, so a lot of watercolors are sold in kits that are come in these dry cakes, and when you open them, open for me, the lids become palettes. So this one, the wells aren't quite as deep, but there's a lot of them, and you can use them for individual colors. You can use them for mixing. So the lids of the kits make great palettes. They don't all have only circles just like this. A lot of them come in have bigger areas for mixing added into the lids as well. So this one could be used for technically watercolor or acrylic. Because these wells are so deep and the walls here are pretty high around the edges, I would say this is more geared towards watercolor paints. Not all watercolors come in those cakes like the kit I just showed you. Some of them come in tubes like this. So if you have a bunch of watercolors in tubes, getting a palette like this is great because you can pour each little section, have a color in each spot, and still have plenty of places for mixing. This isn't airtight, and so when the watercolors dry, and watercolors, that's the great thing about them, is they can dry. You can just add water again to start them back up. When they dry, you just close it and you're done. This wood palette came in an easel kit that I got. I haven't actually used it. There are several type of palettes that are made in wood. They do say that it's easy to clean. I haven't quite tested that one out. But this one has a hole in the middle and an indent for your arm. And it's so you can hold, you just stick your thumb through and rest the indent against your arm. And then you can hold your palette while you paint. You can get almost any type of palette, plastic or otherwise, that has this feature in there. If you're not much of a paint holder though, then you don't need it. Another good idea to use as a palette, believe it or not, is an old piece of furniture. So this board was, or at least it used to be, a shelf to a very old entertainment center that I got rid of. I kept about 3 or 4 of these. They're steady, they're firm, a little hard to pick up. The only downside is that they can be heavy, but these make great palettes. I wouldn't paint directly on them. What you can get is called palette paper, and you just tape it to the side and you've got a great palette. The only downside to that is that they can be a bit heavy. Because there's no raised edges along the sides though, I wouldn't recommend doing something like that with watercolor. I'd probably go with acrylics for that one. This is the palette that I use the most often. This one, it's a pretty large size, and it comes with a lid that makes the interior airtight. This is perfect for acrylic paints. So what you do with these is you get the palette paper and you line it in the bottom. It makes cleanup really easy, but the palette paper has a shiny side and an absorbent side. So you can spray water in this. You can also wet a sponge and keep it in the corner. That plus getting the lid on there really tight will keep your acrylic paints wet for quite a while. I've also used this for oils. When you're using oils though, you don't need the wet sponge. You don't need to spray it with water. Oils stay dry for a good length of time, well enough on their own, and just putting the lid on will keep it wet longer. Another good oil palette you won't find in an art store. The best place to go for an oil palette would be just a hardware store, because the best oil palette that I found is actually just a piece of glass. You would want it at least a couple centimeters thick. It mixes well. It keeps the paints stay right where they're at because you're not dealing with a lot of liquid. And cleanup is just an old-fashioned paint scraper. You just scrape the paint right off. Now, if you don't want to spend any money on a palette, one thing that you probably already have in your house that works just as well is one of these. You have plenty of space for mixing. The edges are raised. So if you're using any liquid like watercolors, you don't have to worry about it spilling off onto your table. And then it's disposable. You could wrap it in plastic, but it would be a little bit hard to get that airtight seal. These don't last very long. Obviously, they're disposable plates. So if you have the moisture and the brushes, it does wear the plate out. But yeah, they're disposable. So it's okay if they don't keep. So this palette is my go-to. So I do most of my painting in acrylics. So this is what I use. And I like it because of the size. So how I set this up is first I have my liner paper. Then I use my paper towels and I get a jar of water. Now I've been trying to use glass for my water. More often than not, if I can't find one, I use any type of Dixie cup because I don't plan on keeping it very long. I have used my coffee to-go cups like this one. I'll show you, it's got my coffee in it. Unfortunately though, I have used it at the same time that I'm drinking coffee. So I have accidentally dipped my paintbrush in my coffee before. And so that's one reason why I like having my palette set up this way, is because it helps me keep my water separate from my coffee. Also, this palette is large enough that I can put some supplies inside of it. So I can put my brushes. I usually just kind of pick a corner for each item. I can load up my paints right here. And then I have a corner that I use as my actual palette. So I'll line up my paints here, blend them down into this area, and then once that's dry, I just move everything down. Hi, puppy. And then I can use the other corner. So one palette paper actually lasts me quite a long time. And that's why I have it set up that way.